Hello, third grade. It's time for science on Monday. You should have your science book out. Remember, that's the one with the dolphins on the cover. Last week, we started learning about plants. And in our first lesson, we learned about what the main parts of a plant are. Those four main parts were leaves, roots, stems, and flowers. We learned about the roots when we looked at the celery. Celery, we saw how the roots could help the water get all the way up into the leaves, and that water, of course, comes from the ground, and the roots are what is taking that in. We also learned about the leaves when we looked at those different types of leaves in the garden. This week, we're going to look more specifically at why plants need roots and stems. So you're going to be on page 10 of your book. Page 10 of your science book in lesson 2. As always, you'll need your notes. Remember, you should have just kept those in your book so that you don't lose them. It's an awesome way to get a good grade in science by keeping track of those notes and filling out everything with us. Last week, we filled out the first two sections. The first two pages. We saw the four main parts that most plants have: leaves, roots, stems, and flowers. We saw that plants and animals need food, air, water, and space to survive. Now, the difference between animals and plants was that animals have to find their food, but plants can actually make their own food. All right? We also learned about systems. Systems are parts that work together. So we've got all these different parts, the leaves, the roots, the stem, the flowers, that are all working together to help that plant grow. When we look specifically at the leaf has four main jobs. 1, the leaf has to make food. 2, the leaf has to balance the amount of water. If we get a ton of rain, the leaf is in charge of letting out any of that water that the plant doesn't need. 3, their job was to keep water in, especially when you're talking about leaves like on a cactus or something like that, to make sure that it preserves water. And then 4, leaves are actually protection as well. Can protect the plant from things that would try to eat it or rip it apart or stuff like that. Now, remember we said plants can make their own food, and most of that happens in the leaves. So they need sun, carbon dioxide, which remember we had abbreviated as CO2, and water. Now today, as we look more specifically at roots and stems, go ahead and turn that page over. Okay, first question we're looking for are, where are most roots found? Let's read on page 10. Why do plants need roots and stems? Along with their leaves, plants need their root and stem systems to live and grow. How roots help plants? This is right on page 10, remember. The root system of a plant is often below the ground where you cannot see it. Oh, we already got it. Where are most roots found? Below the ground. Think about last week when we looked at that radish and the green onion. The radish and the green onion, both of those roots were what was under the ground. They're not found above the ground. So below the ground. If you're still writing, go ahead, pause this video because I'm going to move my notes and get going. Next, we're looking for what 3 jobs do roots have. Once again, if you're not done, just go ahead, pause the video, and then once you're done, press play. Awesome. The root system of a plant is often below the ground where you cannot see it. The roots hold the plant in the ground. That's job number 1. Right? The roots help to hold the plant so that when wind comes or a lot of rain, it stands strong and doesn't blow away. Roots take in water and materials called minerals from the soil. The roots also store food made by the plant. So we have hold the plant in the ground, we also have they take in water and minerals. And then finally, they also store food. So when the leaves make the food, it goes to the roots, and the roots is where it gets stored. All right? Next, we're looking for the two main jobs that stems have. If you're not done, please make sure you just pause this video so that you can get caught up with me there. Many plants, such as carrots and dandelions, have a large root called a taproot. The taproot grows deep in the soil. The taproot stores food for the plant. Have you ever tasted a carrot or a beet? If your answer is yes, then you've eaten the taproot of a plant. Right here, this picture is of a fir tree, and you can see this tangled, let me move my camera for you, this tangled root system here that holds that tree in the ground. Now remember, the ground would be like here, and those roots are beneath it. This here is a taproot. Water and minerals travel through the root through tubes to the stem and leaves. So you got some root hairs on there. Water enters the root through those root hairs. That's kind of like what we had with that radish. Now that was a really small taproot because a radish is small, but that's the idea. You've got one main taproot, and then the rest of the plant makes the food, gets the nutrients from that taproot. Grasses do not have a taproot. So you can see here, this is just kind of tangled mess of all these tiny little individual roots. Now, here's some ideas of roots that you might have eaten. One, we've got our beets, radish, like you saw in our video last week, carrots, and then turnips. At the tip of the root are tiny root hairs. Plants take in water through their root hairs. Root branches, with their many root hairs, grow far into the soil to reach water. Water travels through tubes to the plant system and leaves. On summer days, the root system can be a very busy place. Sunshine and hot air can dry a plant out. The roots must take in water to replace water lost from the plant leaves. That's why it's so important that we water our plants. I've got a couple plants around in our classroom, and let me show you what those look like now. All right, I've got 3 different plants that I like to keep in my classroom. The first plant that I like to keep is this leaf plant. All right, now, like we said before, most plants have those stems, roots, leaves, and flowers. This one's missing flowers. All right, so most plants do have flowers, not all. This plant, as you can see, just the leaf part here, and then if you picture beneath the ground in my pot, that's where all of the roots would be. All right, so this one, all sorts of different plants take different amounts of water. This one doesn't take much water. I don't have to water it very often, and that's why it's still growing, because if I forget to water it over the summer when I'm not at school as much, it keeps on growing. Now, when I got this plant about a year ago, it was about this tall. All right, now you can see it's grown a ton over the course of a year, and because it's had water, it's had sunlight, and it create food and grow. Second plant that I like is my bamboo plant. Now, I have a bamboo plant in my classroom because when I was growing up, one of my teachers always had a bamboo plant. And I always said when I was a teacher I was going to have a bamboo plant. So this is my bamboo. Now, this plant, same thing, but this one grew a little bit slower. So last year it was probably about here at the start of the year, and the leaves probably weren't quite as long, but the actual stem itself hasn't grown a ton, right? You can see all these kind of little notches in it, okay? And this one has leaves that are really, really thin. They're kind of waxy. If we ever get back in person, you'll have to feel the leaves of this. There's kind of an interesting feel to them. Now, this, if you can see in the bottom here, this one does not have dirt. This one actually has rocks. That's because this plant takes a ton of water. Even though it doesn't grow very fast, it takes a ton of water. So it sits in, the roots come down and wrap around all the rocks down here and not into the ground. Right? God's amazing in the fact that He made all these different kind of plants that need all these different things that survive in different environments. Now, my last plant's my new plant for this year. And this is actually a whole bunch of plants, and these are all cactuses and succulents. Now, what those mean are they don't take nearly as much water. They normally grow in a desert environment. So if I were to leave this outside, it wouldn't do very well. There would be way too much water. But because I leave it inside, I can control the amount of water. Now, I have to show you something interesting. Most of these plants are looking awesome, right? Yep, looking great. Now, I got one guy over here that's not doing so hot. See that guy right there? Boom. The second I put him in this pot, I watered him right away. And came back 2 days later and it was all shriveled. And if I touch it, it kind of feels like it's gonna those leaves are just gonna fall right off. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what I did wrong, right? Some of those things that as a scientist I have to experiment with. So first I tried to feed it a ton of water and said, maybe if I give it a ton more water, maybe it just didn't have enough water and that's why it wasn't growing. Well, that didn't work. So now my theory is I'm leaving it sit for now and hoping that maybe if it dries out a little bit, maybe it had too much water, maybe it'll come back. We'll see. I'll keep you guys updated. But the rest of these plants are doing really well. It's very, very dry soil. There's not much here, and I only water it when it feels like it's just really, really dry, and it doesn't take much water. Why? Well, because God made these plants to live in a desert where there's not much water to begin with. All right? But you've got all sorts of differences between all these different plants. It's amazing how God made all of them. All right? That's all you have for science for today. Make sure you tuck those notes back in your book and keep them safe for our lesson tomorrow. We'll see you tomorrow.